My pick-me sister kept putting me down in front of my boyfriend until I snapped. She smiled at my boyfriend and said, "I'm not like other girls." She said it casually, like it was a harmless joke. Like it was something people said all the time. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her legs, and waited for him to react. I felt my stomach drop. I'd heard that line my whole life. Usually right before someone else laughed. Usually right before I felt small. We were sitting at my parents' dining table. The same table we grew up eating at, the same chairs, same overhead light that always flickered when it was about to go out. Everything familiar. Everything safe, except the air in the room suddenly felt tight. She laughed again, louder this time, and added, "Girls are just so dramatic sometimes. I prefer hanging out with guys." Then she turned to him, not to me, him. She laughed at something I said next, not because it was funny, because it gave her an opening. She corrected me on a detail that didn't matter, a date, a place, something small enough that no one would defend me over it. "You always do that," she said, smiling. "You mix things up." I felt my face warm. I smiled back automatically, like my body had memorized the response. Across the table, my boyfriend didn't laugh. He didn't jump in. He didn't look confused. He just watched. That should have comforted me. Instead, it scared me, because I knew what was coming next. I'd lived this pattern before. The jokes would keep landing on me. The smiles would keep going to him. And I would keep choosing silence because speaking up never worked with her. What I didn't know yet was that he wasn't staying quiet because he didn't notice. He was staying quiet because he had. And by the end of that night, she wasn't laughing anymore. My sister and I grew up in the same house, but we were never mistaken for each other. She filled rooms the moment she walked into them. Loud laugh, fast talker. Always confident, even when she was wrong. I was the opposite. I liked listening. I thought before I spoke. I was the kid teachers described as well-behaved and sweet. The kind of words adults use when they don't quite know you. People loved my sister instantly. She made them feel comfortable. Seen. Important. She remembered names, cracked jokes, told stories that always ended with her looking bold or misunderstood. When we were younger, relatives used to say things like, "She's got personality," while patting my shoulder like I was something fragile. They'd tell me how lucky I was to have a sister who could speak up for both of us. I learned early that she didn't need to raise her voice to win. She just needed to be the first one to speak. If we disagreed, she'd laugh it off and say I was taking things too seriously. If I tried to explain how something made me feel, she'd roll her eyes and tell me to relax, and people believed her. By the time we were adults, that dynamic felt permanent. She worked in sales, thrived on attention, and posted constantly. She always knew where to go, who to talk to, how to be seen. I lived quieter. I worked from home as a content editor. I liked routines, morning coffee, clean spaces, predictability. My life wasn't flashy, but it was calm, and calm mattered to me. We weren't close, but we weren't openly hostile either. We had birthdays, holidays, the occasional dinner when our schedules lined up. I learned how to keep things smooth. I didn't challenge her. I didn't compete. That was the deal. So when I met my boyfriend, I didn't think much about how she'd act around him. I assumed it would be the same as always. A few jokes. A few comments. Nothing I couldn't handle. I didn't expect her to turn it into a performance. The first few times we were all together, I told myself I was imagining things. She complimented him a lot, asked him questions, laughed at his jokes a little longer than necessary. That was normal, I thought. She was friendly with everyone. But then the comments started landing on me. If I told a story, she corrected a detail. If I spoke too long, she joked about me rambling. If I expressed stress, she smiled and said she could never live like that because she was super low maintenance. Each comment came wrapped in humor. Each one ended with her eyes flicking toward him, checking his reaction. I started noticing how she positioned herself. She'd sit closer to him than to me, turn her body toward his voice, touch his arm lightly when she laughed, then pull her hand back like it meant nothing. It felt calculated without being obvious. If I reacted, I'd look insecure. If I stayed quiet, she'd keep going, so I stayed quiet. One night, we were all sitting in the living room. Daniel and I were talking about a trip we wanted to take. Nothing serious, just ideas. She interrupted. "Are you sure you can handle planning that?" she said, laughing. "She gets overwhelmed easily." I froze for half a second, then forced a smile. Daniel glanced at me, just briefly, then back to her. He didn't laugh. She filled the silence quickly. "I'm joking." She knows that. But something about her tone had shifted. She was more comfortable now. More confident that no one would stop her, she started making comments about relationships in general, about how men didn't like clingy women, about how drama ruined everything, about how she'd never nag or overthink because she trusted easily. Each sentence felt like a comparison she didn't have to name. I felt myself pulling back, talking less, letting her take the space. It felt safer than pushing against her. What hurt the most wasn't one comment. It was how easily she slipped into this role, like she'd been waiting for the chance, like my presence was something she needed to manage. And still, Daniel said nothing. At the time, I thought his silence meant he agreed. Maybe he saw me the way she described me, complicated, too much, hard to handle. I didn't know then that his silence wasn't indifference, it was attention. And while I was shrinking, he was seeing her more clearly than she realized. Silence didn't start with my boyfriend. It started years before him. The first time I ever tried to call my sister out, we were teenagers. We were in our bedroom, the same one we shared growing up. She had just made a joke about me in front of her friends, something about how I never got asked out. They laughed. I laughed too, because that's what you do when you don't want to cry. Later that night, I told her it hurt. She stared at me like I'd insulted her. Then she started crying. Loud, angry tears. She stormed out of the room and told our parents I was attacking her for no reason. That I was jealous. That I couldn't take a joke. I ended up apologizing. Not because I was wrong, but because I wanted the house to feel normal again. That was the pattern. Anytime I reacted, I became the problem. Too sensitive, too emotional, too insecure. Anytime I stayed quiet, things stayed peaceful, at least on the surface, so silence became my reflex. By the time we were adults, I didn't even question it. When she made a comment that stung, my body already knew what to do. Smile, nod, let it pass, don't give her anything to work with. That habit followed me into every room we shared. When she started with the jokes in front of Daniel, my first instinct wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear that if I spoke up, she'd twist it. Fear that I'd look like the jealous sister who couldn't stand seeing her get attention. I didn't want to be that person. So I told myself it wasn't that bad, that she was just being herself, that I was overthinking it. But my body told a different story. Every time we were together, my shoulders tightened. My stomach knotted. I replayed conversations in my head hours later, wondering why I hadn't said something, then reminding myself why I never did. I noticed how careful I became around him when she was present. I filtered myself. I softened my opinions, chose my words like they were fragile objects that could break if handled wrong. I hated that version of myself. Daniel noticed I was quieter, but he never pushed. Once, on the drive home, he asked gently if everything was okay. I told him I was tired. It was easier than unpacking years of history I wasn't sure how to explain. How do you tell someone that the person hurting you does it with a smile? That calling it out only makes it worse? So I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because I'd learned that silence was the safest option when it came to her. What I didn't realize was that while silence had always protected her, this time, it was revealing her instead. Daniel has always been quiet in a way that's intentional. He doesn't rush to fill space. He doesn't interrupt. When he listens, he really listens. At first, I thought that was just his personality. I didn't realize how much he noticed until later. While I was watching my sister, he was watching patterns. He noticed how often she corrected me, how rarely she corrected anyone else. He noticed that every joke had a direction, and it was almost always pointed at me. He noticed how she laughed before anyone else could, how she framed her comments as concern or humor, never criticism, how she waited for his reaction after every single one. He noticed the way she talked about other women too, how easily she dismissed them, how comfortable she was tearing them down while calling it honesty. At the time, I thought his silence meant neutrality. I thought maybe he didn't want to get involved, that maybe he didn't see it the way I did. But he did. He was just choosing not to react yet. He told me later that he wanted to be sure that sometimes people say careless things without meaning harm. He wanted to see if she would stop on her own. She didn't. Instead, she grew more comfortable, louder, bolder. The lack of resistance felt like permission. Daniel saw that too. He saw how my posture changed when she spoke, how my voice lowered, how I let her interrupt without pushing back. He noticed that I laughed at jokes that weren't funny. He didn't step in right away because he didn't want to speak over me. He didn't want to assume I needed rescuing. He wanted to understand the dynamic before he touched it. That patience mattered. Because while she thought she was impressing him, she was actually teaching him exactly who she was. Every comment added to a picture. Every glance she threw his way filled in another detail. He saw the insecurity underneath the confidence. The need for validation hidden behind jokes. And he saw something else too. He saw that I wasn't responding because I didn't care. I was responding because I'd learned not to. That realization changed how he viewed the situation. This wasn't sibling teasing. It wasn't playful banter. It was a pattern of quiet dominance that relied on my silence to survive. And once he saw that clearly, he stopped waiting. He didn't tell me his thoughts. He didn't warn her. He didn't rehearse a speech. He waited for the moment she crossed a line she couldn't walk back. And she did. Because people who are never challenged always push a little further. They assume the room belongs to them. They assume silence means agreement. Daniel knew that. So when the moment finally came, he didn't need to raise his voice or defend me loudly. He only needed to speak once. And when he did, it changed everything. The night everything shifted didn't feel important at first. It was an ordinary Friday. My parents were out of town, and my sister suggested we all meet at her place for dinner. She lived in a modern apartment near downtown Phoenix, all white walls and clean lines, the kind of place designed to look good in photos. She greeted us like a host who already knew she was the center of attention. "Hey," she said brightly, giving Daniel a quick hug before turning to me. "You made it." The difference was small, but I noticed it. We sat around her kitchen island while she poured drinks. Music played softly in the background. The mood was relaxed, casual, the kind of night where people let their guard down. At first, the conversation stayed neutral. Work, traffic, plans for the summer. Then Daniel mentioned that we'd been talking about moving in together. It wasn't an announcement, just something that came up naturally. My sister paused mid-pour. "Oh," she said, eyebrows lifting slightly. "Already?" The word hung there. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. I waited for her to laugh it off, to soften it. She didn't. She smiled instead, slow, knowing. "Well," she said lightly, "I guess some people like to move fast." I opened my mouth to respond, but she kept going. "You're lucky," she added, looking directly at Daniel. "You must be really patient." Daniel didn't react right away. He just nodded once. She leaned back against the counter. "Not everyone can handle that much." That was it. That was the moment. The comment wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel on the surface, but it landed hard, sharp enough to cut. My hands went cold. I stared at the countertop, suddenly aware of my breathing. She laughed softly, like she'd said something clever. "I'm just saying," she added. "A lot of relationships fail because women get insecure and start pushing too hard." She waited. For laughter, for agreement, for validation. I didn't look up. I already knew how this usually went. Someone would chuckle. The moment would pass. I'd tell myself it wasn't worth it. But this time, no one spoke. The silence stretched. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't confusing. It was deliberate. I finally looked up. Daniel had set his glass down. His expression hadn't changed much, but something in his posture was different. Straighter, more grounded. My sister noticed too. She shifted her weight. "I mean," she said quickly, "you know what I mean." Daniel didn't smile. He didn't rush. He just said her name, not sharply, calmly, like he was asking a question. "Yes," she said, forcing a laugh. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Her smile faltered for just a second. "Sure." He looked at her steadily. "Do you realize how often you put her down when I'm around?" The room seemed to shrink. She blinked. "What? I don't." "I thought that at first," he said. "That you were joking." She crossed her arms. "I am joking." He nodded once. "That's what I told myself too." I felt my heart pounding in my ears. I hadn't said a word. I didn't need to. She opened her mouth to interrupt him, but he kept going. "It kept happening," he said. "Corrections, comments, comparisons." Her voice sharpened. "You're reading into it." He paused, just long enough. Then he said, "I've seen this pattern before." Her face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. "I know about your last relationship," Daniel said quietly. The words didn't land with force. They sank in slowly, like something heavy settling into place. My sister laughed once, short and sharp. "Okay, that's weird." He didn't react. "I know the version you tell," he continued. "And I know what actually happened." Her jaw tightened. I felt frozen in my seat. My mind raced, trying to catch up. I hadn't told him. Not once. I hadn't even hinted. He noticed my reaction and shook his head slightly. "Not from her," he said. I recognized the behavior. The room felt smaller now. The music still played in the background, but it sounded distant, muffled. "You undermine people quietly," he said. "You frame it as humor. You wait for approval." She shook her head. That's not fair. I didn't say it was, he replied. I said it was familiar. She looked around, as if expecting someone to jump in, to laugh it off, to defend her. No one did. I've met people like you before, he went on. They rewrite their past. They make themselves the victim. They avoid accountability by sounding confident. Her hands clenched into fists. That's not who I am, she snapped. He didn't raise his voice. That's who you're being. She stared at him, stunned. She wasn't used to being spoken to like this, not calmly, not without emotion. He continued, I watched how you treated her, every time. You waited for my reaction. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp and accusing. I'm not confused about who I'm with, he said. And I don't find confidence built on comparison attractive. The words hit harder than shouting ever could. She tried to recover. Wow, okay, this is a lot. I didn't realize you were so sensitive. He smiled faintly. I'm not. Then he said the line that ended it. I don't confuse attention with character. Silence, real silence. No one laughed, no one spoke. For the first time in her life, she didn't know what to say next. She stood there for a moment, frozen, like she was waiting for the room to reset itself. It didn't. She picked up her glass, took a sip, then set it back down untouched. Her confidence drained slowly, visibly. Well, she said, forcing a smile, that escalated quickly. No one responded. Daniel reached for my hand. That simple gesture felt louder than everything else that had been said. I think we're going to head out, he said calmly. She blinked. Already? He nodded. Yeah. As we walked toward the door, she called after us. I was just joking. You know that, right? Daniel paused. He turned back. I know, he said. That's the problem. We left. The drive home was quiet, not uncomfortable, just still. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. My chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. I'm sorry, I said eventually. I should have said something earlier. He squeezed my hand. You didn't need to. That was it. She didn't apologize. She didn't confront me later. She didn't bring it up at family events. But things changed. Around Daniel, she became reserved, polite, distant. The jokes stopped. The comments disappeared. She lost the room she'd always controlled, and she never got it back. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Because for the first time, someone saw the truth without me having to prove it, without me having to defend my feelings or explain my silence. And I learned something that night. Sometimes, the most powerful moment in your life isn't when you finally speak up. It's when someone else speaks the truth you've been carrying, calmly, clearly, and walks away without needing applause. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. Subscribe for more real stories where quiet strength wins, and tell me in the comments if you've ever had to stay silent just to survive.